Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about Coral Viper. This is the newest update coming to Company of Heroes 3, and Relic just did a pretty lengthy live stream. So we're going to be diving into that in just a minute here, but you're going to see everything from 3 new maps to new features such as accolades, map vetoes, surrender feature, which is very cool to see, new pathfinding improvements, and then at the very end of the video, we're going to be diving into the battle group. So it's going to be covered by Miguel and Darren. So we're going to see everything there is to see about these 2 new battle groups. This is going to be the first preview. And then at the very end, I'm actually going to give my own breakdown and my thoughts and perspective on those battle groups. So I left a timestamp there if you guys want to check that out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video.
And today we're going to be taking a deep dive into our upcoming Coral Viper 1.60 PC update. We sat down and pre-recorded several interviews with the team to discuss all the new content, features, and improvements coming in Coral Viper. We'll be covering the 2 new battle groups and new maps, plus great improvements to vehicle pathfinding and new features such as vote to surrender, matchmaking cooldowns, mission select, an all-new accolade system, and more. So let's just get right into it. Once again, we are joined by Will Ward, Senior Map Designer here at Relic, to talk about the new maps coming in Coral Viper. How you doing, Will?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Will, we've got 3 brand new maps coming in this update. Do you want to talk about which ones we're bringing over and the work that we did to select these maps and how we ended up bringing them in? Because I believe we have 3 more maps from the community.
That's right. Yeah, 3 community maps in one big drop. Do you want to rattle through them one by one?
I think these are really good maps.
Yeah. So to begin with, we are bringing in Eindhoven, which is a Code2 favorite 2v2 map.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a brand new contender. We have Gothic Line, which is a 3v3. And then we have Oasis Depot, which is a 4v4.
Oasis Depot is my favorite.
Eindhoven. So all of these maps are going to be coming to all modes. And as we mentioned, these are community maps. So Will, can you maybe talk a little bit about the history of Operation Eindhoven and the work that we did with Spanky to bring this into Company of Heroes 3?
Yes. So this is a map that I've wanted to bring in from the very beginning. For those who aren't aware of what is now known as Operation Eindhoven, but was originally just Eindhoven, it is a Code2 map created by Spanky and has been sat at the very top of the 2v2 auto match maps for a long time. I think it is the most played 2v2 for the last 3 years at least.
Interesting.
So this was a map that I wanted to bring over straight away. It's a great design. It's very, very familiar. It isn't overly complex, which is great. So beginners can jump into it straight away. But it's got enough twists and turns to it that it's formidable even in the highest of gameplay.
Is it any different from the
really
Code2 version?
The time very well. But this was a case where, although we could have technically built this ourselves, because we wanted to bring it in, I sort of knew that Spanky was still active. I was like, I'm just going to let this one sit because I'm hoping that Spanky will bring it back to the fore. And of course he did. And it's been lovely to work with him. I've known him for a long time. We haven't worked together directly. We've kind of worked alongside each other when we were both community mappers. So yeah, I'm glad to see he was still active and eager to bring this back.
Awesome. So I've got some words here right from Spanky themselves. Spanky says, quote, Operation Eindhoven has been a challenging first project because of the new world builder tool that we got, but also a fun learning experience overall. I wanted Op Eindhoven to be as true to the original as it could be, and with all the new assets to play around with. It has been a pleasure to recreate this iconic 2v2 map from Code 2. Relic took note of this effort and contacted me, which led me to working with Will, aka Monolithic Bacon, to bring Op Eindhoven to Code 3 Auto Match. And I have to say, we as a community are very fortunate to have him as our lead map designer. What a legend.
How sweet. How very sweet.
Cool. So what can players expect with this new version of Eindhoven?
I mean, honestly, it's so familiar. I wouldn't expect anything dramatically different, which is no bad thing at all.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
So well, so familiarly that players will hopefully be able to just jump back into the play styles that they were used to. The main differences are going to be visual, in that we've got all of our new assets. It's got new lighting. But honestly, it is just a solid all-round map. And yeah, it'll sync.
I
straight
feel like
back
I
into
prefer the
production right
daytime
away, top
version
of
more than the nighttime.
no time, I'm sure of it.
Okay, so let's.
It would be nice if they
head over to our
offer
next map here.
like a transition or
Ahaha, right. So we have Gothic Line. This map has been known by a couple of names. I believe it was also Green Line. But Gothic Line is 3v3 made by Toby, who is also another very long time mapper.
this is a tough map to
I've
play on.
known
I
and
feel
worked
like
alongside Toby for a very long time. And a lot of his maps also sit in the Automatch pool in Co2. So as soon as I saw that he was also active again, I reached out. This was, I believe, one of his entrants for the 4v4 map making competition way back. And we thought, right, there's plenty of opportunity to work with this. It needed some refinements and improvements. So Toby and I worked on things like adding more heavy cover to places that needed it, refining some areas like the top of the hill, and where we can, making it a little bit more automatch appropriate. So this map features an emplacement wall across the center of the map that's been breached. So working on those breaches in the wall to make sure that the map opens up more as the game continues. What we want, for example, is for the major lanes to become pathable as light vehicles come into the field, and then more open and pathable when medium tanks enter the field, and then even more so when heavy tanks.
Okay, so Toby says about Gothic Line, quote, Gothic Line started as a choke point map featuring a wall of fortifications on a hill, with the focus being on destroying the walls to open up avenues of attack. Feedback led to me making more paths up the hill and through the walls, and then Will gave me some great advice, including how to improve the cover and help people approach the center line.
very technical. I mean,
That is it. Yeah,
it's going to be.
and this is Toby's style all over. It's like, this is just a lovely visual map. He's always had a good eye for detail. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how people play on it, because it will be new to the Automatch pool.
Yeah. So you mentioned that this was entered into, I think, Greyshot's map making competition. So I think those were 4v4. So it's, did you do work with Toby to make this a 3v3? And what did that look like?
Yeah, funnily enough, this is a conversation I had with the gameplay designers yesterday. 3v3 is such an awkward map size. Because if you look at, say, the opposite sides of it, you look at 2v2 and 4v4, they are both very specific map sizes. 2v2 is simply too big for 1v1. It's not double the size, but it's about 50% bigger. And 4v4 is colossal. And if you're making a 3v3 map on purpose, chances are you're going to either end up with an oversized 2v2 or an undersized 4v4. And it isn't too hard to convert a 3v3 into a 4v4 just because it's slightly too big.
Right.
Whereas this map was designed to be a 4v4, and honestly, the more that we played it, and it was Toby's decision in the end, and I believe it was the right one, it was just simply too small to be a 4v4.
Okay.
So most 3v3s that are designed as 3v3s don't end up as 3v3s because they're just an awkward size. 4v4s that are too small to be 4v4s end up as 3v3s. It's such an awkward map size.
Okay, cool. Any sort of final thoughts or expectations for Gothic Line that, what are players going to get into here?
I mean, as always, I'm just looking forward to see what people think of it and how they play on it. This is a very different map to what we've made before. It is very much a heavy 3-laned map, but it's bisected with cliffs on either side. So you've got the open hilltop, and then you've got the 2 lanes down the side. So it'll be very different in how it plays to a lot of our maps. Which is good, which is great to keep the map fresh.
I think it's going to be like a big stalemate in the bottom,
so let's
and then a heavy fight for the middle and top.
Our 4v4.
Yeah. Hey, so
this map is sweet.
Is Oasis Depot, which was
super cool.
The winner of Greyshot's 4v4 competition. So the designer of this map, Spring Air, and I have been in contact for quite a while now. This is a map that when we looked at it, it was certainly worthy of the title of winning the 4v4 competition, but it had some features to it that I wasn't comfortable putting into the Automatch pool. And Springer agreed with me when we went through a number of features that probably just wouldn't stand the test of time. We've mentioned before that when we're bringing in community maps, we want them to stay there. We don't want to bring in community maps that need to be replaced or immediately running into bugs or issues.
Right.
So we sat down with this map for a number of months. Springer's a very busy guy, so bless him. He put a lot of work in his spare time to try and make some changes. So for people who played this during Grey Shot's competition and played the workshop version, you'll notice that there are some pretty significant differences. Notably, the central island of this map is no longer fully enclosed.
Mm-hmm.
You can access that central island from various routes. So if I think we're driving into it now.
Yeah, that's a good change.
Yep.
Yeah, so there are lots of vehicle paths instead of infantry-only paths. The
Not a
bridges are
crazy
no longer
defender's
the only way
advantage.
onto this island. So the cliffs have been pulled away, and there's plenty of access ramps up. And all the water in this area is now pathable.
Mm-hmm.
There are only a very few small sections of water that can't be accessed.
Yeah,
The water.
that's a good change too.
Things like this jungle here, this very overgrown area, the trees have been clustered rather than scattered.
Mhm.
So you have better pathfinding for light vehicles and team weapons like AT guns, which
Beautiful
really
map,
resource
man. Look at that.
Right.
Looks so good.
And just generally refining loads of things across the board. We've refined cover. We've adjusted some of the territory. The urban areas in particular have seen a lot of love. We've clustered some buildings together rather than having gaps, lengthened wall sections. Lots of work has gone into this map. I'm very pleased with how it's come out. I think it's going to be a very, very solid entrant into our 4v4 pool.
Very cool.
So Springer told us, quote, having had the opportunity to work with Will and Relic, this has been an amazing experience. Will is an incredible designer, and I've learned so much from our discussions. This type of collaboration with the community is truly commendable, and I hope more people will have the opportunity to participate in it.
So
yeah,
flattered.
yeah, I know. All these people have nice things to say about it. Yeah, Will, I think we're pretty excited to bring these three new maps to all modes for our players. Any final thoughts on these maps?
3 maps is awesome, man. We got 7
Nothing
in the last
I haven't
update.
already said. Honestly, I can't wait to see what people think of them. I'll be watching live streams the day they come out.
3 more maps. It's just going to add so much life to the game.
Fresh feedback as it comes through. Yeah, it's been a pleasure working with all these folks, and I look forward to working with them again in the future.
Okay, so that's
Thank
gonna
you,
do it.
Will.
Thanks so much for joining us, and for obviously working with Spanky, Toby, and Springair to bring these maps to Company of Heroes 3. And we will catch you next time.
Dude,
So
we have a pretty big map pool now
Hey there, everyone. And
for
now
1 year
I'm joined
post-launch.
by Cam and David to talk about some exciting new features that are going to be coming to Company of Heroes 3 in our Coral Viper 1.60 update. Cam,
Senior
David,
designers. Look at these
how you doing?
gamers.
Doing good.
Great.
How are you doing, John?
I'm always peachy, but it's good to see you both back here. So I know we've been working really hard on some long requested features that players have been really looking forward to. David, I hear that you make missions. So I'm curious if you can share with us today what you've been working on.
Yeah. So I'm one of the mission designers here, and one of the things that we've been working on is a way for players to go back and play the missions from the campaign map without having to go through the entire campaign map. So we're adding in a mission select system. And what that's going to let players do is there's going to be a new option in the single player menu, and you're going to be able to go through and select any of the missions that are playable in either the Italian dynamic campaign or the North African operation.
That's cool. I could see that
very
very
cool.
useful for
I
the
know,
dynamic campaign.
Our sort of big set piece missions are often fan favorites, so I'm excited for us to
That's
roll
cool.
this out, as I know it's something players have wanted to see for a while.
I would not play the dynamic
So
campaign, but
you
I
said
might
you
try
kind of
one,
select
like a mission
right
here
away,
and there.
So you have to play through the campaign.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as the feature is added to the game, all of the missions will just be available to players.
That's sweet.
We've organized it so it kind of, you start with Operation Husky, and the last one on the list is the Winter Line, so you can kind of play through them in order. And once you select one of the missions, or at least for the Italian campaign, you'll decide whether or not you want to play as either the British or the Americans. And then once you're in the game, we've kind of added the abilities and stuff that you might unlock during the normal progression of the Italian dynamic campaign. So in the earlier missions, you have access to maybe just a single call in or a couple of passive abilities. But then as you get to the later missions, Anzio, Ortona, the Winterline, like I said before, you're going to have lots of call-ins and abilities and some of the passives and stuff that are available in the dynamic campaign. We just kind of apply them to these missions. So there is this sense of progression, I guess, as you're going through all of the missions.
Okay, so if I was able to choose a faction or use one of my British or American companies on the campaign map, I can now make that choice before I jump into one of these missions, and you'll just give me a company and certain abilities already.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of set up for you. You just get to select the mission you want to play. You select the faction you want to play as. You also get to select the difficulty as well. So you choose whether you want to play anything from easy to expert, and then you just hop in and play. It's just going to be a more kind of simple and straightforward way to just jump in and start playing the mission content if that's just what you feel like doing, going back and playing some of your favorite missions and stuff.
Awesome. Well, glad to hear that. I'm going to throw a question to both of you. Cam, maybe you first. What's your favorite mission from either the
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
One of mine,
or the North African operation? Yeah, which one's your favorite? Which one are you going to jump into first once we roll out mission select?
I am a big fan of Potenza. I just love how that mission starts. You're kind of thrown right into the action. And then it is also one of David's missions. And then you progress through up the hill and through the city. And it's just got some really cool level design to it, some cool sights and visuals.
Okay, cool.
Well, thank you.
Correct.
I appreciate that.
What about you, David? And you can't pick one of yours.
Fine. I actually I really like there's a couple of the raid missions that I really like, and they're kind of the little smaller pop-up missions. There's oh god, I was about to call it River Crossing Raid, but that's not what it's called in in game. That's what it's called like on the dev side. But yeah, it's one of the missions where you go in and you just like have to run through as quick as you can and destroy stuff.
Mhm.
And I always really love Monte Cassino. It is a fun, real, just like set piece mission. You just fight your way up that big mountain kind of face and stuff. So that one of those two, I think, are the ones that I would jump into.
Very cool. Very cool. So again, like I said, I know players have wanted this capability to go back and check out some of their favorite missions without having to replay an entire campaign. So I'm glad that we're finally able to roll that out. But David, maybe you can tell us about some of the incentives that players can earn as they go through this.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Multiplayer incentives or what?
Kind of more ways for single player players to gain merit and to interact with our daily and weekly challenges. So what we're doing is we are adding an additional daily challenge for 30 merit that's just going to ask you to play one of the missions, which now that we have the mission select, you can just go in and select the indicated mission. So you're actually going to be able to get a little bit more merit every day.
Okay.
And so we're
That's
also
cool.
going to take one of the weekly challenges, because there's usually 3 weekly challenges. We're going to take one of those slots and replace it with a single player, play a single player mission on expert thing. And you have all week to do that. In addition to all that, we're kind of rebalanced some of the merit rewards that you're given for the rest of the weeklies. So the other 2 non-single player weekly challenges are going to be increased to 400 merit instead of 250. So if you don't want to play single player, although why wouldn't you want to, you can still be gaining quite a bit of merit if you stick to multiplayer only. So we increased those ones. But in general, overall, if you do complete both single player and multiplayer challenges, you're going to be gaining more merit per week than previously.
Very
So
cool.
there's just going to be more merit on the table for everybody to get.
Very cool. Very cool. So Cam, I think that's a good point for us to segue to what you've been working on, because I know player progression is something that we're thinking a lot about. So yeah, can you tell us about the feature that you've been busy implementing?
Yeah, so there's a new feature we're adding called Accolades, and this adds a bit more progression into the game. They look very similar to challenges, but there's a few key differences. One is that they never expire. You can work on them for a bit, you can leave, come back. and they're still there. And then the other difference is that you complete them in order from 1 to 10 in a series. So there's one for every faction, and as you can work on them, it gives you something to work towards a little bit longer term.
Okay, cool. So I guess I'm kind of curious what types of accolades or challenges we're talking about for each faction. If we've got 10 of them, I imagine it'll still take us a little bit of time to work through those.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they're all over the place. The idea was that many of them could be completed in single player or in multiplayer or in skirmish, any mode. Some of them are specific to skirmish and multiplayer, where they ask you to complete or get the BAR upgrades by a certain time. Some of them are to get a certain number of kills with certain units, and then some of them are to play specific missions. But I think many of the ones that ask you to kill a certain amount of units, you could do that in single player, you could do that in multiplayer. And it's totally up to you.
Okay, so I guess one of the bigger goals behind the accolade system is to incentivize players playing maybe a faction that they're not used to, or they don't necessarily play all the time, or to teach some of the strategies that might be common with that faction.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're jumping into the game for the first time, it'll teach the flavor of each faction. If you're playing a new faction that you haven't played very, very much, it'll encourage you to use certain mechanics and certain parts of the faction that we think is ideal and cool.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'm kind of curious what kind of work went into implementing the accolades, Cam? Like what was sort of your process or your thought process when you're thinking about like, okay, how do we get players engaging with these factions, and how do we design these accolades to sort of teach these things to players, or to get players to play in new and interesting ways?
Yeah, so we know we wanted it to be something that you work at longer term, but it was really bringing in the whole team and making sure that the challenges or the accolades that you're working at are interesting to do. That some of them are grindy, but not too grindy. Some of them are easy one-offs that are fun to do and encourage you to play a certain way. But it's really bringing in the whole team and making sure that every designer can throw out ideas, and then making sure that we're hooking up interesting rewards as well, so that it's not just challenges for the sake of challenges, but many of these will give you rewards for your player profile, things like titles.
Okay, nice. Yeah,
new merit rewards as well.
That's cool.
Okay, very cool.
It's actually a difference
for me. So it's good to hear that we can earn some stuff by going through these.
Actually,
accolades.
a difference between accolades and challenges.
Are there any sort of standout favorite accolades that you worked on?
I'm a huge fan of there's one for the Africa Corps that gets you to get a certain amount of kills with recovered vehicles. So you have to recover the vehicles and then get a certain amount of kills with it, which I think is pretty fun.
Okay, sounds a little bit challenging. What about you, David? Have you engaged with any of the accolades yet? Have you seen any that you're like, oh yeah, that one's spicy, I like that one?
There are ones that ask you to play certain missions. I think there is one that asks you to play Saving Private Norton, right? Yeah. And I like that little mission. That's a fun little mission.
Awesome, very cool. Well, thank you both for joining me today. We'll keep it short and sweet. I'm very excited to see Mission Select and the accolade system roll out in Coral Viper. So thank you for all your work on that, and we'll move on to the next segment. Thanks so much, Cam, and thank you, David.
All right, two good little features. Nothing crazy.
In addition to these changes, we have several other improvements coming to Coral Viper for those that love our missions, or playing solo or co-op with friends. With Mission Select, players will also be able to track the hardest difficulty used to complete a mission, along with their fastest completion time. For our co-op players, you'll now be able to change your difficulty selection before queuing for a co-op versus AI match, meaning you have greater control over your comp stomps in auto match. Going hand in hand with this, we've also made several changes to our AI to make them feel more competent and more efficient in combat. Vehicles will now be smarter about their positioning and their movement, meaning they'll take safer approaches to fights and use their range to their advantage. Infantry will just be better at recreating team weapons, and anti-tank guns will be smarter about fighting at a distance and not putting themselves in harm's way.
All right, and now I'm joined by Miguel, aka DevM. How you doing, Miguel? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see
legend.
you. I'm doing good. Just been down on the pathfinding minds.
So I'm glad that you're here to talk to us about pathfinding. 'Cause I know it's always a hot topic amongst our players. I know you implemented some vehicle pathfinding changes in our last update, 1.5. Can you maybe
Yeah.
touch on that before we get into what you're doing in Coral Viper or 1.6?
Yeah, for sure. So we had noticed that when reversing with vehicles, sometimes they would take like these wide paths, which for kind of frontal movement, that's fine because that kind of allows the vehicle to not lose any of its movement speed. But often when reversing, that can mean that you stay longer in the arc of fire of an enemy team weapon, for instance, and that could end up with you losing your vehicle. So we always have to be really careful with those kind of changes, or with pathfinding in general, because in Company of Heroes, losing a vehicle is very significant, right? So we're striving to just give over control to the players when we do these changes, rather than the game kind of trying to predict too much what you want to do. So in this case, we kind of tightened the curve, so that the vehicles follow a lot more closely the path that you decided upon when reversing.
Good change.
Okay, so it sounds like the work that you were doing in 1.5 was kind of the, obviously the ongoing work that we were trying to do here to improve that feel, that game feel. And it sounds like you've done a lot more work that we're bringing out in Coral Viper. So can you maybe start describing some of the work that you've done here to improve pathfinding?
Yeah. So first, I think it's important to kind of define what the kind of problem statements were. So we had noticed lots of player frustration when engaging with pathfinding still, even though it was obviously an improvement and it has been improving ever since launch. But we have what the community calls vehicle donuts, for example, where the vehicle kind of circles around.
It's very annoying.
We also noticed that players felt like the pathfinding was inconsistent. And all of this kind of creates a frustrating experience with pathfinding, because what you want with pathfinding is once you click as a player, you want to be able to know beforehand kind of what path the vehicle will take. You don't want to have to always keep your eyes on your vehicles when you click somewhere. You want it to be predictable.
Yeah.
So a lot of the frustration that we wanted to address kind of comes from resolving that, the predictability of the pathfinding. So with that in mind, the reverse changes that we did for 1.5 is that when a player clicks somewhere, their expectation many times is the shortest path. So, and that is also where the challenge has been, because we have a game that's also trying to simulate reality to some extent. So when a vehicle does a turn, if it's a really tight turn, it's going to lose speed. It would look very odd for any vehicle to do a tight turn and literally just zoom past through the tightest of turns. So it is beneficial that our pathfinding does wide turns many times, but we also have to acknowledge that there are some instances where the player wants to closely follow the path, which is why we started with the reverse behaviors for 1.5. But now for 1.6, we wanted to address a lot more than that. And we started by looking at the vehicle donuts, or the vehicles doing wide circles. So
oh my god, that's so bad.
Kind of started
that's crazy
penalizing in a way turns that are too wide, depending on the angle, which basically means that the vehicles will never do donuts.
Thank you.
It's too penalized. It's too bad of a wide turn. And that with some turn plan adjustments should make the vehicles a lot more
great change. I like that.
You'll not be seeing the vehicles doing any like funny behaviors, hopefully. With that in mind as well, talking about turn plans. So turn plans, which basically dictates how you do a certain pathfind. So how our game works is you calculate the path, and then turn plans kind of make that seem more realistic, where vehicles try and adapt their turns to kind of meet that path that we calculated.
Okay.
And we made multiple adjustments to turn plans. One of them, for example, was also reducing some of the radiuses on the turns, which actually really impacted on how sometimes vehicles could or could not fit into certain stretches of the map, where maybe before they would incur that pivot, now they would be able to do an actual turn, which obviously from a player perspective is always a lot smoother to do turns instead of pivots. Another thing that we changed, which players have been talking about before, is this is also a turn plan change, is how far back do you have to be for the vehicle to not consider reversing anymore on your normal clicks, not the reverse command itself.
Right.
So kind of to give some context for people, the reason why we had things as we did is because for casual players or people that are not part of the hardcore multiplayer community, often using direct commands like the reverse command is not something that players really use. So we had to balance those out, those two worlds. So what we did is we halved the value, so from 40 to 20, and this should make it a lot more consistent now, where in the 20 unit range, the unit will reverse if you click. But past that, it will go with its front armor.
Oh, I see.
And what
Okay,
this kind of allows is that for
that's fine.
players that often just wanted the vehicle to go somewhere with the front armor over longer distances, they will not reverse anymore, because we had noticed that sometimes even over long distances, where almost never a player wants the vehicle to be reversing over long distances, the vehicles were doing that. So that should solve that. Another thing
That's
that we
fine.
need to tackle, and make sure to stop me, John, if I'm going
No,
over
keep
too fast,
going. Keep going.
is casemate vehicles. So we also noted that, particularly for players, these were kind of tough to use, and they are by far the vehicles that are also the toughest to kind of balance out with pathfinding. So because they have a fixed turret, they really do care if you do a turn like before or after. If they're already pointing to somewhere, they can easily get outflanked if the pathfinding does something wrong. So what we've done is we tightened the curves as well. So usually if you do three-face orders or usually movements with casemate vehicles, you'll notice that they have a very like S shape to their movement.
Yeah.
What we've done is we tightened both of them, and
Yeah,
now
that's
it
good.
should be a lot easier for the vehicle to, once it starts moving, to already have the turret facing where you want it to turn. Whereas before, because the S turn was so wide, it could happen that on the last stretch of the turn, you would have your back against the enemy, which many times created like a frustrating experience.
Right.
Um,
A lot less
so
micro
what it
required
should
now
feel
for
like
these
now
guys.
is, I'd say, an improvement over Company of Heroes 2. We did take that as inspiration as well. It should feel a lot more safe now to use casemate vehicles overall. And I think the last thing that I would do want to mention is changes to what we call sector path. So we have what we call a sector path, and we have what we call a low path. And the low path, for people out there that are kind of familiar with this, is kind of your pathfinding algorithm. Many times we call it A-star. That's kind of the industry standard for that. But we also have a sector path that kind of helps this low path pathfind around a large map. It's kind of the purpose of it. So we've made adjustments to both of them, and what we want to hit with those is how the vehicles feel when they're going around objects. So many times it's not enough to have just the shortest path to somewhere, because the shortest path might be that you go with your back around an object instead of with the front. So we made adjustments to both of them yet again to feel a lot more smooth and predictable, where if you're with the vehicle going around an object, it's more likely that it'll just go with the front because it makes more sense. And we also made some adjustments to the overall long distance pathfinding, where before we had some unpredictability with if the vehicle was facing somewhere. In that case, because it's over a longer distance, you don't care as much if the vehicle is facing somewhere, you just want the shortest path. So over long distances, that behavior kind of changes. So we had to adjust for that. And I mean, player expectation changes on that. So those were all the big changes, but something that is always not reflected on these changes as well is that we also did some bug fixing around pathfinding, that we had noticed some odd behaviors.
Okay.
So that will always feel also, it's hard for the players to really understand those ones, but it will make the pathfinding feel overall a lot more predictable and fun to engage with.
Okay. Hey, that's good to hear, because I know our goal with this is always to again make vehicles feel responsive, make the game feel fun, and to reduce that player frustration. I know a lot of the subjects that you were kind of covering here with the changes that were being implemented and some of the concepts that you were talking about are a little bit complex. I'm just a simple community manager from the prairies. Sometimes this stuff is over my head, but I know we're going to be releasing a comprehensive blog post that you wrote up describing all these changes.
Yes.
So that will go up in tandem with the patch notes. So folks can go check that out at community.companyofheroes.com so they can read that more in-depth explanation. But Miguel, I know one of the things that we sometimes hear from players is, a little bit of frustration over why these types of changes might be taking a little bit of time to implement. So I'm wondering if you can maybe describe sort of the depth of complexity here and why it might take us a little bit of time to get these changes out to players.
Yeah. So pathfinding is one of the systems that you need to be really careful about when you touch. It has heavy implications on every part of the game, even single player. So what that means is that if you change something on pathfinding, you need to be able to test almost everything again. And not only that, but because of how our maps are complex, and our vehicles, the way they work, are also complex. Like each vehicle almost has their own acceleration, their own speed, their own pivot rate, everything. And all of those impact how pathfinding works, right? So if a vehicle is like very mobile, they'll be able to do turns that kind of clunky tank wouldn't. So it's very hard often to do a change of pathfinding and just release it. You need to be able to thoroughly test it and also see if it hits the goals that you originally had. So that is the reason why pathfinding takes longer. But not only that, but it's not only about the testing, but even doing the changes. This is not only kind of data changes. These are also behavioral changes in the code. So code is always going to be prone to bugs, new bugs.
It's complicated, man.
Especially when there are so many things depending on it, right? So we want to be able to do these changes and properly test them and be able to iterate on them and see if it hits the goals that we had.
Right. So we want to make sure that we do this work right and not necessarily rush it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's thank you for explaining that. I really appreciate it. And I know we're going to continue monitoring player feedback on these changes and these systems as we move forward. And I know we really appreciate everyone's patience, as I know you and the rest of the team have been hard at work on this. Miguel, any sort of final thoughts on the pathfinding changes coming in Coral Viper?
Yeah, I just want players to give feedback when they can on the official forums. We are always looking for feedback, especially on pathfinding. Hopefully, this set of changes will finally make the game kind of feel a lot more responsive and predictable, which is what players wanted. And specifically, just let me hear your thoughts on how case-made vehicles feel now, those Marder tanks.
Devem is the man. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Miguel. Appreciate you joining us here to explain everything that you've been working on for 1.6.
Huge improvement to the game.
Move on to the next segment. So thanks, everyone.
Hey, everyone. My name is Marcus2389. If you have seen me on Company of Heroes 1 and 2 or on ch2.org, I'm a game designer at Relic on Company of Heroes 3. And today we're going to talk about surrender and auto-match cooldown.
Okay, so I know these are long requested features from players. We had some similar features in Code 2, but I'm curious to see what it is that you're doing to sort of bring some of this across to Code 3. Can you maybe talk about some of the design goals that you had with implementing the new vote to surrender and auto match.
I can't wait for this feature because I get Gazala landing ground
goals
90% of the
when
queue
you're doing
time.
it.
It's
Yeah.
very frustrating.
So at a high level, we started a journey with players of improving their matchmaking experience and their user experience with the game. In Still Shepherd, we redid pretty much the whole front end, and we introduced or basically we removed a way for players to dodge matches.
Mhm.
Now with surrender and auto match cooldown, what we want to do is further improve that matchmaking experience by providing them a way to forfeit a match in a honorable way. And at the same time, we want to counterweight that for players that are not behaving as we expect by, let's say, preventing them from disrupting other players' experience.
Right.
And so in the auto match. And so like for the other features we have been talking about in the past, we're taking an iterative approach. So this time around, this is our first iteration with surrender. And so we are still looking at it in the future. We are going to improve it. And but like we outlined in Still Shepherd, we have to work within certain constraints, like for example, being unable to make players reconnect to a match, which does have some interesting interactions with a system that penalizes them, like by introducing a cooldown.
Yeah.
As other games do allow you to, like, if you crash or if you disconnect, you can reconnect and then you don't go through a cooldown.
Yeah.
And we have to balance that with our system.
Yeah, I think players can go back and check out the really excellent write-up that you did on the replay feature to sort of understand some of the technical limitations around how much data is being pushed for things like replays, so you can have a better understanding of some of those issues.
Yeah, and also one notable is that, like for replays and other features, we started from our discovery phase and we looked at, what did competitors do for their surrender feature? What do other games, other RTS games, but even non-RTS games do when they want to have a feature like that? And we tried to find a middle ground that could fit with both the time we had to make this feature and something that could make players still like happy and feel like this is meaningful. It has reasons to exist, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so vote to surrender. How does this new system work?
Okay, so at a more like lower level, it is similar to the competitors to surrender system. So you have there is a voting system that is available from the 5th minute mark. So after 5 minutes, you can start the vote. You have 30 seconds to express your vote, and not voting is considered a no. The person who starts the vote is automatically voting yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for the voting to be successful, you need at least 50% plus 1, so more than 50%, to make that vote succeed. So let's say you have two ways, of course,
sense.
to vote. You can vote yes or no. Yes votes will be visible on the left, and no votes will be visible on the right in a nice pop-up that appears on the top left of the screen. And you have like two different outcomes, of course. A positive outcome. So you call for a surrender vote. Enough people vote yes, we want to surrender, and then the game ends with a loss.
John surrendered.
Or a negative outcome. In the case of negative outcome, the person who started the vote is unable to cast a new one for 90 seconds. But other players in the same team can still try to start a new surrender vote. One thing that is different from Competitors 2, though, is that we didn't want your opponents to know that you have started the surrender vote.
Okay.
So they will only be aware if the surrender vote ends successfully, of course, because they will get an end of match screen.
I get that, but
and at the same time, they will get it through a message in the chat box as well as the video that plays for when they win the match.
Do you guys like that more or less than
Also, the
KO2?
number of
Really curious.
active players in a match does change the minimum amount of votes required for a surrender to end successfully.
Okay.
I would prefer to
So
have the
if
surrender in the
someone
bottom
dropped
left
in that game,
map,
then
the tactical
vote
map,
threshold will change.
like
Correct,
KO2.
exactly.
So I'm kind of curious how this system, the vote to surrender system, is going to be different from how it was implemented in Company of Heroes 2.
Okay, so we have like two aspects of it. There is some things that are different and some things I can say that are definitely improved. In terms of difference, this time we are no longer preventing players from getting achievements and challenges, which is basically what KO2 does to discourage players from quitting. We don't feature that, so players can still get their achievements, their challenges, progression, and so on. We do have, however, these auto-match cooldown that happens whenever a player exits a match without using surrender. And this doesn't matter if it's 1v1 or 2v2, 3v3, or 4v4. As long as they are in an auto-match game mode, so quick match and cop versus AI, they will be basically they need to vote to surrender.
Right.
They don't have to quit. If they quit, they incur into a an
interesting.
auto-match cooldown.
Really interesting. Okay.
So that also means that we have like some specific behaviors that we had to tweak. Like for example, many Company of Heroes 2 players are used to use this command in the chat box /L, which allows them to leave matches immediately. Now, in the KO2 environment, doing that doesn't really incur in an auto-match cooldown penalty because they don't have that. But in KO3, it would. Right. So we decided to tweak that so that using /L would trigger a surrender vote. Of course, if this is 1v1, this means that the vote ends immediately and they surrender immediately. But in team games, this means that they just start a surrender vote and you need to meet the requirements.
Interesting.
However, in cases where you don't meet the requirements yet, because maybe you are before 5 minutes, or maybe you have already started a vote in the last 90 seconds, then what happens is that you will get a message in the chat telling you that you're not meeting the requirements. You basically have to wait until you can. And these cooldown, the 5 minutes, will be visible in the game menu. So the way you surrender, the way you start a vote is you open the menu of the game and you have a surrender button that is initially disabled with a cooldown that goes from 5 minutes to 0, after which then you can click on it and you can start a vote.
Okay, so just to clarify, if I quit a match before that 5 minute mark, will I incur a penalty?
Yes, correct. So we actually are going to track the entirety of the match.
Okay.
So no matter if you quit in the first minutes or 20 minutes from the game, if you quit or crash or disconnect, you're going to incur into an auto-match cooldown, so a penalty. Now, what happens though is that since we are very aware of our limitations, we are trying to design a system that is fair and not too punishing. So unlike other games, we're not going to be too harsh to players.
Right. Okay. So which modes, you may have already covered this, but which modes is Surrender going to be available in?
So Surrender will be available in any multiplayer game mode. So quick match, cop versus AI, and custom games. However, the auto-match cooldown will only be active in quick match and cop versus AI. And it's actually shared between the two modes. Okay. So if you quit cop versus AI and you are issued a penalty, that goes also through to the quick match.
Okay, good to know.
Good feature, man. I like this feature a lot.
Another thing that
I think
we're
it's
doing
a net
is,
positive.
A little bit of a change to the post-match. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So this has been also a requested feature. So this is actually not just surrender. It's a bunch of different features. So it's surrender, an auto-match cooldown, and the post-match observation, which is basically in case you have a successful surrender vote, or the game just ends in the normal way. So the match ends because you have your enemy has 0 victory points, or you have 0 victory points, you have destroyed their base, or they have destroyed your base. What happens is that we play the end of match video, either win or loss, and then we bring you back to the game. The game will be paused, the simulation will be over, but you will have a chance to look at the map, look at
Super
the
cool.
units, look at your units, enemy units, and
That's
kind
awesome.
of do a, like, I don't know, take your time to do an evaluation of how the game went on your perspective.
Right,
I
like
love
a bit
it.
of a post-match analysis of like, okay, how
Exactly.
did I get here?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we will feature another button available that allows you to then go to the post-match stats.
Man, that's one of my favorite features.
that
Really,
you
really
use.
nice.
We're also enabling this feature into replays.
Mhm.
So right now, what happens in replays is that as soon as the replay ends, we are going to we bring you to the post-match stats. But with this addition, what's going to happen is that as soon as the replay ends, you are going to see a still of the game, and you can still observe the game, and you can still see what happened, and then you can click on the button and go to the stats.
Okay, very cool.
Badass,
So let's
man.
maybe
I love
drill
it.
down a little bit more on the auto match cooldown, because I know that's a new thing that we're bringing to the franchise. And of course, this is something that's in other titles out there. But I'm
Yeah.
kind of curious, why did we bring this to Co3? Again, what were some of your design goals? And can you maybe get into some of the specifics about how that system works?
Absolutely. So we're bringing this in Co3 for the first time, with the intention of creating a more fair experience to all players. We know that this is not the last step. There are a lot more steps that we have to do, and we hear you loud and clear. We are committing to them. But this is a strong step. Even though we knew about the limitations that we have, we wanted to commit to something where players that play fair are incentivized to continue doing that, and players that don't play fair should be aware of their behavior, and we should preventing them from disrupting other players' experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
So this
Good.
system is really meant to dissuade players from quitting, especially in team games, basically, and instead use the right surrender flow. So what we have built is this system that will apply this cooldown that prevents you from searching in an auto match game mode. And we're going to track, as I think I was mentioning before, the entirety of the match. So it doesn't matter when the quit happens. We need you to play the whole game or surrender.
Right. Yeah.
In order to go to, let's say, the right thing, follow the right flow.
Yeah. So if I quit a match in the early game versus me quitting a match at the halfway point or near the end game, I'm still going to be penalized.
You're still going to be penalized. Yes. Okay. We are going to communicate to players in a very clear way that quitting is not the action they should follow in the game modes where this feature is enabled. So when you open your menu and you hover the mouse on the quit match button, you will see an on-hover tooltip, this basically explaining you that you shouldn't quit, that if you quit, you're going to get an auto match cooldown penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Same for the confirmation model. We're going to show the same text to enforce the concept that you shouldn't quit. You should try to surrender as much as possible. Yeah. However, for everything I've said before, we are also in an attempt to build a more fair system where we will have a built-in grace buffer. So we are going to try to account as much as possible for occasional crashes or disconnects, or even live occurrences that might happen to our players.
Yeah.
So in those
I would love
cases,
a reconnect feature, man.
You will not see or receive a penalty because you are basically expanding your part of or all of your grace buffer.
Right. Yeah. Because we're very aware that like everyone has real lives where they may need to step away or power goes out or internet goes down. So we want to definitely account for those factors and not be too overly punishing, should something happen that's outside of your control. Because Mark, you can maybe clarify, but like this system is really designed for to sort of mitigate a consistent behavior
Yes.
that we might see in some some players.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be a punishment. It's meant to mitigate those behaviors and overall improve players' experience. Sorry.
Yeah, create better sportsmanship. I think it's going to be good.
This is why,
overall.
for example, if you ever happen to encounter this, but I wish you
E-sportsmanship,
don't, you will notice that the cooldowns that we have are built to be incremental, and they will be exponential as the more times you quit without surrendering. So you will notice that the first times you quit, or maybe you crash because of that, the cooldowns that you get are minimal. They're not you're not going to wait like hours. But if it happens consistently and multiple times, then you're going to see bigger and bigger numbers, which will really prevent you from your play session of the day eventually. Mm-hmm. So you have to be careful, but we do hope that this works more as a deterrent. So players know that it's there, it exists, and if they want to play, they should play fair.
Right. Yeah. And so really about sort of upholding the integrity of the match that you're going into with other players, so that everyone has that experience that they want to have. Without it being disrupted, and again, like you said, the punishments or the cooldowns rather will scale if we see that there's like a clear pattern of behavior there.
Exactly. Also, part of it is that we also built a system that is meant to be pretty flexible, so we can really change or tweak or disable the system on the fly without needing to patch the game. Mm-hmm. This comes in hand because as we did with the ELO enabling that, we can then monitor the game, we can monitor the game health and take decisions based on what our telemetry is telling us, what player feedback is telling us, and we can adapt the system on the fly to better meet players' requirements and even what telemetry tells us about that.
Okay, good to know. It's good to know that we have that flexibility and can sort of adapt it based on that player feedback.
Coral Viper will introduce the next two battle groups for Company of Heroes 3 for the British Forces and the Deutsche Afrika Corps. We're happy to say that the new battle groups planned for Coral Viper will be available for free for all players via the in-game store. This is our way of thanking all of you for sticking with us over the last year as we continue to work to improve the game and create more content. This offer isn't planned to expire for now, but if we change the price later on, we will give you plenty of notice. Anyone who unlocks the battle groups for free will be able to keep them, even if their price is adjusted in the future. So be sure to claim them right when they're released. We'll be talking to the design team about creating these new battle groups next, but first, here's your first look at battlefield espionage and Australian defense.
The Australian Defence Battle Group, one of the first divisions that were able to beat back the Blitzkrieg at Tobruk and El Alamein. This battle group specializes in creating a defensive frontline position with logistical support at the rear to create a strong economy.
That's awesome.
Once
Very
supply
cool.
lines have been established, you'll be able to take on the Axis forces with superior range and firepower. The Australian Defence Battle Group is split into logistical supremacy and frontline defenders. Let's take a look at frontline defenders first. The Australian Light Infantry is a 5-man squad equipped with Lee Enfield rifles. Like infantry sections, they can be upgraded with scoped rifles. This squad performs well at long ranges, and with their sharpshooter ability, they can increase their accuracy for a short time. There'll be no time for lollygagging, as this squad is capable of constructing field defenses and emplacements, including the durable Sangar wall to hide behind. Australian Light Infantry can hold the line, but they are not equipped with grenades or anti-tank weaponry.
Oh wow,
We've
that's
got
really
just
limiting.
the thing for that. The 2-pounder is a light anti-tank gun.
That is
It's quick
awesome.
to fire, fast to reload, with a decent firing.
It's so cool looking, man.
At Veterancy 1, the ability to target weak points becomes available, slowing the target vehicle hit and disabling its weapons for a short time.
I wonder how mobile that is.
Defensive Tactics grants your sappers and Australian Light Infantry the tools needed to build the 17-pounder and Bofors emplacements. The emplacement for the 17-pounder is massive, but if you're able to find a clearing for one, then you won't have any trouble penetrating even the thickest armor from afar.
It's a total
Whilst
throwback
Bofors
to the
can
old
provide
British
adequate
factions.
anti-air coverage to shoot down enemy aircraft, it's also effective against infantry and light armor. Hold the Line is a defensive ability that bolsters the defense of your emplacements, team weapons, and base buildings. This reduces the incoming damage as well as a small heal over time. Find yourself under heavy artillery fire? Then hold the line. The over-repair ability allows your sappers to repair vehicles past their maximum health values,
What does that mean?
enough to potentially shrug off an extra shell from a medium tank. That can be enough to get your tank to safety for another round of repairs, and then back into action for another tour of combat.
Interesting.
Switching over to logistical supremacy, you'll find abilities that help strengthen your economy. The CWT supply truck run is a new mechanic which collects fuel or munitions from resource points. Activate this ability by clicking on a resource point, and then a supply truck will drive to that location. Once there, it will take some time to load the cargo, and then make its way back to add
That's
the
a
resources to your stockpile.
New feature to the franchise.
The amount
Very
of
cool.
resources you earn is based on the distance between the sector control point and the headquarters. The further you go, the more you get, and the more dangerous it will be.
Very similar to
The enemy
Age of
will be
Empires, if you
alerted
guys
to the
have played
presence
that.
of your supply truck, so defend it at all cost. If the enemy destroys it whilst it's carrying supplies, they'll steal the cargo.
I hope it has a lot of health, though, because I feel like it's easy to
Reinforced
kill.
provides cheaper and sturdier caches. Perfect for locations where you are already focusing a strong defense. A new construction option becomes available with artillery tripwire flares. These can be planted near sector control points for a small amount of munitions. When the enemy trips the wire, a flare will reveal the surrounding area, and a single artillery shell will strike.
Oh, wow.
Letting them know
Very cool.
these are our resources. Charged Creeping Barrage designates a line of shell fire from point A to B. This type of barrage was often used as a shield for advancing infantry, but it works great against any established enemy frontline positions. You'll need your supply routes in check, because this will cost you a heavy amount of munitions. The Archer Tank Destroyer has arrived. This tank destroyer is equipped with the 17-pounder. It's got range, it's got firepower. When it's stationary and out of combat, the first shot against its target will have increased accuracy, penetration,
Dude,
and
that thing
damage.
hits so hard.
With its great reverse speed,
Jeez.
it can quickly deploy, take a shot, and then reposition to safety.
Damn.
The Australian Defence Battle Group has excellent defensive capabilities and equipment that hits from afar, but they also paint large targets on their back. You'll need to use everything you've got to protect your supply trucks, keep your emplacements firing, and fuel your war. The Battlefield Espionage Battle Group specializes in camouflage and subterfuge.
It's the DAC battle group.
Avoid
Okay.
the enemy's detection, then be the first to strike hard and fast. Use underhanded tactics to steal enemy resources and disrupt their intel in the combat zone. The Battlefield Espionage Battle Group is split into infiltration and disruption. Let's take a look at infiltration first. The Funk Panzerwagen is a non-combat vehicle. It can be upgraded from the 250 half-track or arrive as a call-in. With the Coordinate Ambush Operations ability, it can provide camouflage to your nearby units.
Oh,
However,
wow.
it does not camouflage itself.
That's super strong.
Infantry and team weapons that are camouflaged gain the first strike bonus, increasing damage and accuracy for a short duration when engaging.
I wonder how much
Funk
bonus that
Panzerwagen
unit
can
receives.
deploy the standard Shu-42 mine and the anti-vehicle telemine.
Really strong. Okay.
If that wasn't enough, how about the Goliath?
Oh,
A
shit.
remote-controlled light-tracked vehicle carrying
Oh, my
110
God.
pounds of explosive.
It's good to see the Goliath back,
The
too.
Goliath can be deployed out the back of the Funk Panzerwagen. You will need to use camouflage to get it close to targets to deal devastating damage. It doesn't move or turn fast and can be destroyed by light arms fire.
Super strong,
It
I
is
feel
also
like.
easily detected by minesweepers. Anti-tank guns will be bolstered with incendiary munitions, dealing a small amount of additional damage over time after the round penetrates. This burn damage cannot destroy vehicles.
Oh, okay.
You will also receive the Haft-Holodung
Interesting.
anti-tank grenade to replace the standard AT grenade, dealing superior damage. Advanced ambush training increases the first strike bonus of your infantry squads, as well as extending the duration, leading to deadlier ambushes for your infantry squads when engaging from camouflage.
So it looks like it's going to give Dak more infantry
Prepare
optionality.
yourself for
Stronger
Operation
infantry styles of
Scorpion.
play.
Upon activating the ability, all vehicles will gain camouflage, reducing their speed. When a vehicle is revealed, its rate of fire will increase for a short duration,
Wow.
allowing you to choose your targets carefully before pummeling them into submission.
That ability is
In
crazy
addition
good.
to this, vehicles lost during Operation Scorpion will have a portion of their cost refunded.
Oh my god, man.
Now
That
let's
sounds
look at the
overpowered.
disruption side of the tactical tree. The Battlefield Espionage Battle Group can choose one of 2 radio beacons that can be constructed by Panzer Pioneers, Panzer Grenadiers, and the Funk Panzerwagen. The Intel Disruption Beacon detects nearby enemies, marking their location in the fog of war. This beacon also provides camouflage to nearby infantry and weapons teams.
That's insane.
The Sector Subterfuge Beacon steals resources from enemy territory. If this radio beacon is in your own territory, it will make it harder for the enemy to capture. Whilst these beacons are camouflaged, they can be easily detected by scout-type units.
There's little symbols above the unit indicating their
Plunder allows you to
beacons nearby.
scavenge vehicle wrecks for weapons. The weapons you gain depends on the squad. Panzer Grenadiers get a BAR or light machine gun. Assault Grenadiers gain a Thompson SMG or STG-44.
That's pretty cool.
Panzer Jaegers get an AT rifle or bazooka, and Panzer Pioneers get a G43 scoped rifle or a light machine gun.
That's also a new feature in the franchise. I like
Transfer
it.
Depots
I think.
upgrades your resource caches to be able to trade fuel or munitions for manpower. The resource exchange rate can be improved by constructing the depot on higher yielding fuel and munition points. Disruption Operation reduces your enemy's situational awareness, leaving them more vulnerable to surprise attacks. Once
What does that do?
activated, the enemy unit's vision range will decrease over time,
Okay.
and their accuracy reduced. They will still be able to engage targets that are firing upon them, but they'll be less likely to notice other units sneaking up on them.
So you just got to get out of that range, that
Scorch
zone.
the earth in a storm of fire. This ability shells the area with incendiary rounds which burn the ground. Infantry and structures will take damage over time. Infantry will also move slower and be easier to hit.
I think it's a good ability for Dak to
Battlefield
have.
Espionage Battle Group is great at indirect attacks. However, in a straight-up fight, they have little firepower to fall back on. So make sure you're the one that's dictating the battlefield, and never let your opponent take the initiative away from you.
Very
Now that we've had
proactive
our
infantry
first look
style.
At the brand new Battlegroups coming into
Interesting.
Company of Heroes 3, I figured we should talk to the 2 folks primarily responsible for getting them into the game and designing them. First up, Darren, how you doing today?
Doing well. And yep, my name's Darren. I'm one of the game designers and balance designers who have worked on the Australian Defence Battle Group.
And Miguel?
Hello, I'm Miguel, a gameplay designer here, and I worked on the Battlefield Espionage for the deck.
Amazing. So 2 brand new battle groups. I know we're really excited to get these into our players' hands, but I kind of wanted to get you both here to talk about their development, maybe some of the big picture goals around these battle groups. So we've had a quick look at the new units, their abilities, how these battle groups are kind of made up. But let's maybe start with the Australian Defence. So can you tell me maybe at a really high level, what were some of our design goals with the Australian Defence Battle Group?
Yep. So on the higher level goals, the Australian Defence Battle Group was to be one of those more defensive battle groups. Not quite on the level of Coastal, where it's a lot of structures, but more so in it has a lot of defensive abilities and units that synergize well together, or because none of the other 3 British battle groups currently are defensive, really. Most of them rely more on offense or artillery
Mhm.
to push the line. But we also, for the Australian Defence Battle Group, have something quite special. Although created by one of our designers, I'll reference him here, Marco, we have the CWT supply truck run, which is probably the biggest thing of this battle group and
Super
the whole
interesting
series
feature.
in terms of like its functionality.
Yeah.
It's interesting for me to hear you say that, because I'm just like, oh, it's just a little supply truck. It just goes to a where it needs to, and it comes back. It seems pretty straightforward, but you're right. It's definitely new for the franchise. Can you maybe talk about why did we decide to pursue that, and what that up capability brings to?
I feel like
the
it's
British
so much
forces?
harder to
one of-
use than
what
the
this brings to
traditional
our
kind.
gameplay is something like new that's not just it's sort of resource manipulation, but not in the sense where you just trade resources for one for the other. There's a lot of counterplay to this one where one player needs to get their truck up to a fuel or munition point, and generally they want to go for one that's much further away from the base
Mhm.
because resources that you get scale with distance. So this does create an interesting sort of play where the player who deploys the truck wants to keep his forces around or near the truck to protect it so it can pick up its payload, come back, and give you a large amount of resources. But the opposing player in return wants to deny this truck for the player, or by taking it out through whatever means possible. So it could be either camouflage units, raiding units. However, when the opposing player takes it out, not only are they rewarded with denying that sort of truck, they also get some of the resources that the other player would have in return.
Right. So very high risk, high reward.
I have a lot of thoughts on this thing. A lot of thoughts on it.
What about you, Miguel? Maybe you can talk about the Battlefield Espionage Battle Group. What were some of our high level design goals with this battle group for the Africa Corps?
Mm-hmm. So the faction itself lends itself to some very aggressive play. And we thought it made a lot of sense, given also some of the historical reasonings on North Africa with the supply lines, to include kind of this camouflage / ambush playstyle for the deck. That was the main inspiration. And we wanted to kind of pursue that kind of flanking maneuver that deck is kind of known for, and its mobility, right?
Cool. Very cool. So maybe we could talk about the theming for these battle groups. How did we land on these themes? And how did we approach sort of building them around, their respective faction? Darren, maybe you can talk about the Australians first.
Yep, for the Australians, in terms of their gameplay theme, they are heavily based on the more defensive play, with a lot of their units being based on the Australian forces at Tobruk. Though obviously we have a few additions like the Archer Tank Destroyer, which obviously did not see the action at Tobruk. But for the British in general, this provides them a sort of a defensive play style where they can have a lot of setup units or setup emplacements that need to be placed down. But in the early game, actually, the Australian defense is a little bit more aggressive than the British would be. The Australian light infantry can be called in immediately, and they're very good at capturing territory. And they fight better at closer ranges than the standard Tommy squad, though they are worse at long range. But however, as the game progresses you'll find that building their Sangar bags, and once they're equipped with scope rifles, they start turning from this offensive capturing raiding unit into more of a defensive hold unit.
Interesting.
Okay. Miguel? What about the?
I have some thoughts on that as well.
Espionage, same thing. Why did we land on this theme, and how does it complement the Africa Corps?
Mm-hmm. So for the deck, we wanted something that wasn't pure strength, in the sense that you don't have like a vehicle like the Archer. We wanted something to kind of complement their already base playstyle. And what we wanted to, or how it complements their playstyle a lot, is that we wanted this feeling of uncertainty when the opponent is playing against this battle group. We want the opponent to play a lot more carefully around the map. So we also wanted the opponent to have a very specific playstyle against it. We wanted to enforce like the usage of scout units to actually detect the ambushes. And the battle group itself also has a lot of emphasis, not the battle group, the faction itself has a lot of emphasis on vehicles. But we
Yeah.
wanted something that also made players a lot more comfortable with using their infantry and their team weapons. And the battle group kind of plays a lot around that.
It makes sense.
Okay.
I like that.
So I'm kind of curious, how do these new battle groups kind of compare to the existing ones for each faction? Darren, let's maybe start with the British.
Compared to what the other battle groups offer, the British Australian has a bit more resource manipulation, particularly if you base it around the truck, though it also does have like the stronger and cheaper caches. Is to add to it, in terms of like how it plays compared to the other or battle groups, like it is, as I said, more defensive. The archer, the 2-pounder, and the emplacements are obviously not units that are able to push up on the field on their own.
Pretty
They're
damn
best
cool, man.
used when
I dig it.
used to support other units on the battlefield. Well, the Australians though are a bit more able to stand on their own, unlike the infantry section, at least in an infantry fight. They are just generally a bit stronger, though they do have their own weaknesses. It's like the Australian light infantry can't really deal with vehicles, so they're a bit more reliant on the 2-pounder or to deal with those vehicles once you've hit a certain point to the game where combined arms start taking more of an effect.
Mm.
However, the battle group still does allow you to play a bit more heavily into like some sort of assaulting role later on. You do have the vehicle over repair, giving all your vehicles more health, allowing you to essentially soak another shot for the most part. And you have a very strong artillery ability in the form of creeping barrage if you're not going with the archer, if you want to push into the enemy line. And as I said, it's all backed up by the possibility of a strong economy when using the truck.
Super
Okay.
cool.
Miguel, what about the Battlefield Espionage Battle Group? How does it compare to the existing battle groups for the Africa Corps, and what are some of the strengths that it brings to the table?
Mm-hmm. So this battle group does play a lot differently from other battle groups. And starting from the
Looks
left
like the
side of
most
the
unique battle
tree,
group we've
it
seen in
offers
terms of.
a lot of ambushing tools. So you have the Flank Panzerwagen, which enables those ambush operations. Not only that, but it's also a vehicle that we wanted the battle group to play around it. So lots of mining, getting munitions for you to use the other abilities, and combined with the branching choice of, do you want to be better at ambushing vehicles or better at ambushing infantry? It really enhances that ambush operation feeling for the battle group. And then on the end of it, we have Operation Scorpion, which really creates like
overpowered.
these moments and opportunities for the DAC player to just destroy or
Strike.
disrupt the supply line of the enemy or the front line.
Super
then
strong.
on the other side, we have access to some beacons, which really do change the way you play with the DAC and even within the battle group itself. One of them is the Intel beacon, which basically creates these zones of ambush operations. And as the enemy, you really need to be careful of just going without vision or without scouting the area first.
Mhm.
And you can think that whenever you have, for example, selected the anti-tank ammunitions, that if you're not careful, your vehicles, if they get ambushed, they'll just like get destroyed right away. So again, enforcing
Seems
that
really good, man.
playstyle that we want you to be scout against this battle group.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have more of a economy focus or disruption of economy focused side of the battle group, where with the siphon beacons, you can put them down on the territory or in the sector, and the resources will start getting drained from the opponent. And you really need to keep an eye out for those, especially, if you're not used to looking at your territory points, you might find that you have been siphoned for most of the duration of the game. And we also have abilities like Plunder, which are honestly really cool to engage with. Basically, your units get better through time just by plundering enemy weapons or even like your own wreckage. If you lose a vehicle, it might be an opportunity to actually get some new weapons from it. And finally, we kind of round off that side of things with some fairly big abilities. One of them, Disruption Operation, which allows you to just choose an area and the enemy starts losing vision around it and also accuracy, which is really good if you are scouting an area with your camouflage units and you want to start an operation there.
Yeah.
Just put down the ability and then move in. And that is paired up against Firestorm, which is somewhat of a callback to a Co-1 ability, but in this case, it's geared towards more area denial. So the idea is you scorch an area and the enemy cannot pass through that area for a duration of time, or they can, but they'll obviously get punished for it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm really
Okay.
excited about some of the things that are coming, particularly in Battlefield Espionage, and I think that obviously pairs in tandem with the changes to scouting and detection. And I imagine that's sort of like a direct response to a lot of the camouflage and
Yeah, you need more detection in the game now.
abilities that are going to be coming with this battle group,
I
right?
feel like.
Yeah, it definitely made a lot of sense to have a look at those with the introduction of this battle group.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's just a lot more options in general to find camouflage, so our players will be able to have counterplay.
That's
not
super
just on the
important.
Scout units, but it should bring back like some more users of like the scouting abilities.
Very
Yeah,
technical battle
so it'll
group.
be interesting to see how players utilize some of those maybe underutilized abilities or units in response to some of these new battle group abilities. So I'm kind of curious about maybe some of the counterplay to these battle groups, because anytime we introduce something new like this, there's there's always concerns like, oh, maybe this is too strong. So how should I as a player maybe tackle playing against the Australian defense, Darren? Because they got some really beefy defenses. They got the Bofors, which I'm excited to see again. The anti-tank emplacements. But I know players can sometimes be a little frustrated when playing against really defensive battle groups. So how do I play against them?
So we'll start with the left tree. So at least for fighting against like the big economy of the Australian defense battle group, like the big thing of the trucks is they're very slow once they're loaded, or just in general, they're even slower when loaded, but they're slow to begin with. So they're very easy to pick off if they don't have anyone protecting it. So like light vehicles are very good against it, ambushing infantry. And we've even had games where people would paradrop units behind the lines to go after the trucks.
Okay.
As well, like the enemy was distracted on the front, so they could steal the resources from that truck. So anything that can get near the truck will generally be able to destroy it, but obviously there are units suited to it, like raiding vehicles. Also, if we go further down outside the reinforced cache, which is just a resource cache, and the artillery tripwire, which you can sweep with minesweepers. The Archer is very powerful. It's more reminiscent to, if anyone remembers, Company of Heroes 2 tank destroyers.
Dude,
that you
this
have
thing is going to be
extensive
so good.
far range and damage. However, the Archer in itself is quite slow to move around the field, especially if you want it to be facing with its gun pointed. It's doing what it does historically. It moves faster in reverse. It moves much slower when it's going forward.
Interesting.
Right, so
Okay.
the counterplay to the Archer is you can either outmaneuver it, forcing it to move to positions that it doesn't want. However, the Archer itself is also very fragile and expensive for its cost because it takes on that sort of tank sniper role. It really needs to sit behind the line. It really doesn't want to brawl with enemy units just because it is a very easy investment to lose to units like anti-tank guns, and even cheaper units like Martyrs can swarm it and take it down cost effectively if it's not being shielded. So there is a lot of ways to bring down the Archer. It is because it is an extreme unit. It has extreme firepower, but it has some like very key weaknesses of
Extreme
like low health,
vulnerability.
low speed, and mobility.
Yeah, it makes
Okay.
sense. I think it's a very cool unit to have
Any
for the
other
British.
sort of major counters to the other defensive aspects of the.
So the Australian light infantry, they're good infantry units as a combat unit. However, they lack the utility of like the Tommy in terms of like the roles that the Tommy can take on with their various upgrades. So even when you upgrade like the Australian light infantry with scope rifles, you're going to be missing things like snares. Australian light infantry can't do anything to vehicles for the
Mhm.
most part. they can only really fight infantry. So you can either fight them with vehicles, advanced infantry, depending on if the Australians are in a bad position or not, or you can try to control them with also weapons like machine guns, because they do have a little bit more sight range with the scope rifles, but not enough to just spot machine guns before they spot them, where Tommies obviously have their flares to fire off into the fog of war. And yes, for the most part, though, the best counter to Australian light infantry is just vehicle play.
Okay.
Just because they have nothing they can really do against it.
Okay.
Hence the 2-pounder.
Sorry, go on.
As for the rest of the battle group, we like the 2-pounder. It's very good against light vehicles, but it's not really going to scale into the late game against tank. And so if you have like Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs pushing your line, the 2-pounder is only really going to provide like supporting fire. It's not going to be able to solo those vehicles, even if you have probably like 2 to 3 of the guns.
That's to be expected.
Comes together. While for the defenses themselves, both the Bofors and the 17-pounder emplacement, neither of these have the 17-pounder can't deal with infantry, so it can be rushed up to. And the Bofors can't deal with heavier vehicles, but indirect fire is the primary way to get rid of those defenses, because this battle group, for the most part, does not have any way to counterfire the artillery units.
Okay.
It lacks any sort of like real artillery unit that's not from the core of the roster.
It's a good point, actually. I didn't think about that.
Own mortars or bishops. You don't really have like the coastal's ability to just zone out with the Obiche or artillery overwatch.
Right.
But the bishop is amazing anyways.
So they can be bombed, and emplacements are not cheap. You can get them fairly early into the game, but you are making a big opportunity cost for going into these fuel-heavy emplacements. It's where you might want a light vehicle much earlier in the game to put the pressure on the enemy rather than letting your enemy take the initiative. And they also have a reasonably long build time. So these do need time to be placed in 45 seconds and around for each. And that makes it very easy if the enemy spots you building these to rush the emplacement.
45 seconds each, did he say?
Right.
That's pretty long.
And I imagine like it's the type of thing where you can't necessarily have too many of them, otherwise you're eating into your pop cap pretty
yes,
severely.
these emplacements also take up population.
Yeah.
Cool.
Miguel, what about battlefield espionage? You got all these units that are invisible. They're all concealed. You're taking away my resources. You're making it harder for me to see. How do I play against this battle group?
Hard to play in technical, but seems really strong to me.
The main counter tool is scouting, which we are going to introduce. So the battle plays a lot around the fact that you need to get first strike off. And if obviously you're detected before then, you're not going to be able to do that. Same thing, to be able to get your kind of enhanced AT abilities off on enemy vehicles, you need to have that ambush set up. But if they scout you out, again, you cannot do that. So scouting against this battle group is the #1 counter. But there are a few other things to look out for. So the battle group itself is pretty munitions hungry. And it relies on the infantry wagon to generate some of those munitions. So that unit in itself, the vet ability is it generates munitions for you. So if you can destroy that vehicle against a DAC player, they'll struggle to use some of the abilities of the battle group. And there's also
that unit looks super good in terms of utility.
The enemy is looking for wrecks to plunder. You can also destroy the wreckage, and the DAC player cannot make use of them. And another thing to look out for is the position of the beacons. So regardless if they go for the intel beacons or if they go for the siphon beacons, you can look for their positioning and try to destroy them with scout units. Especially with the beacons that steal your resources, you want to look at your territories and always be on the lookout for resources that are being stolen from you. So there's a few things you can do. There's also the transfer depots, which you should be on the lookout for because they give the DAC player some pretty good deals, especially for a faction that is usually manpower hungry. These transfer depots do help them a lot. But yeah, those are the main things that we wanted to kind of enhance in terms of counterplay. Especially the scouting is what you should be looking out for. And if your faction has access to flares or any sort of ability like that, that's the kind of premium counter, because you don't even need to walk into the zone.
Okay. So just to clarify, with the Intel Disruption Beacon and the Sector Subterfuge Beacon, I know scout units can detect those. Can any other unit detect those? Like, is it a range thing or is it a specific unit thing?
Yeah, I'll let Darren speak to that one.
For detecting the beacon, regular beacons are just considered standard camouflage units. So like any unit that's a detector will pick them up at extended ranges, but you can also regular units, if they get close enough to the beacons, similar to like the advanced infantry radio artillery beacons, you can find them and take them out. But the best units that are good for just like sweeping beacons, particularly siphon beacons, are units like the 4x4, the Humber, any of the fast moving light vehicles. You can just have these patrol your territory, destroy beacons as they're found. And while the DAC player might get a little bit of resources, if you destroy them fast enough, it is costing the DAC player quite a bit of manpower to build these beacons. Right. And we know DAC in general is quite manpower heavy compared to the other factions.
Yeah, I don't find that beacon that strong, the subterfuge.
Very cool. So I kind of want to talk about like our favorite parts of these battle groups, because I just watching the videos, I'm just like really excited about them. I think they have a lot of really cool, abilities and units and a lot of fun flavor around them.
Some new features.
I was super excited to see the Goliath come back.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see some really fun memes. Yeah,
it's a fan favorite.
Must begin.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll see lots of fun clips.
I wonder how much that costs.
So let's maybe talk about your favorite parts of each of these battle groups. Darren, I'm going to flip it on you. So what's your favorite part of the Battlefield Espionage battle group?
I think my favorite one is in general the Panzer Funkwagen, just because it has that core around it, but you can also do a lot of things with it. It's a mine planter, it's a Goliath deliverer. It can also capture territory, and it can also
it does everything.
Generate munitions. And like if you also go the Funk Panzer Wagon early, which is not hard because it's a core aspect of the battle group, you can also convert your existing half tracks into the Funk Wagon. So that always means like the DAC player can get access to this unit, which it's always nice to have. And well, the second ability I very much always enjoyed about this is, the Siphon Beacon, just like, doesn't know it's there. I'm slowly stealing your resources. He doesn't know how much he's losing and how much I'm gaining.
Miguel, favorite part?
Darren is the best, man.
Definitely the Goliath. Close second, probably Operation
Scorpion looks so damn strong, man.
I'm a pretty aggressive player myself, so I love to do those big camouflage operations on the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be so effective for big swings.
One of the first clips
in team games
that you had shown me internally about that, and I was just like, "Oh man, this
and you could trade so effectively."
Silly, but I think there's going to be some interesting
because you're getting a return on your lost vehicles
on multiplayer games, and
which is crazy.
Even just playing against AI, I think will be fun with that. Let's talk about the Australian defense. Darren, what's your favorite part from the Aussies here?
I like the 2-pounder, man. That unit's sweet.
Designers do enjoy having the truck in general because of its fun play and what it can create. Maybe because it does change the battlefield just by entering.
I like the truck too, but
like, oh no, there's a truck. How are people going to react to it? Are they
how viable is this?
Resources? Are they going to suddenly push me and steal my truck's resources?
Mm-hmm.
But also, one of my favorite units is probably the Archer. As well, just having that very long, punchy tank destroyer, keep at max range, but it also will just die if you look away from it for a moment.
The Archer's a unit that can totally change how the game is played.
Cannon sniper unit
because of the range
in a vehicle form rather than infantry form.
Okay, Miguel, favorite part of the Australian defense?
I'm going to go with supply run as well. Not being understated the amount of work that went into that ability. But it's so fun to engage with. I think for any game mode, really. It creates this moment in the game where you're like, I need to destroy that truck if you're the enemy. And you're trying your hardest to do so. While if you're the one using the supply run, you're like, I want to protect this until it gets to my base. And it will give me a big chunk of resources that will allow me to get this very nice vehicle, for example. I think it really adds a lot to the gameplay in a way that Company of Heroes series hasn't seen before.
Mhm.
Almost feels like a campaign mission suddenly.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, I got to kill the truck. Mission objective
Yeah.
updated.
Yeah, I have visions of players sort of furiously typing to each other, "Get on the payload! Get on the payload!" Awesome. Okay, let's wrap things up. I know this has been a long video, and we kind of want to end
I
things
have
on
some
a high note
thoughts
here.
on
So,
this.
final thoughts, Darren, on these two new battle groups. How do you think they're going to affect the multiplayer meta, or just sort of shake up the game in
I
general?
think Australian defense is going to be more your conventional battle group in terms of like, oh, it's the Australian defense, and so you sort of react to it, but you still generally have those more specific build orders that are more versatile and able to deal with like the Australians. And so you might change up a few things, like maybe I go a vehicle a bit faster, or I try to bully the Australian light infantry in a different way that is not just like trying to fight them head on with standard infantry, but a more supportive, like with machine guns. But the what the heck is back? DAC battlefield espionage. This is definitely
Darren,
gonna
I love Darren,
be
man.
one to look out for, because it doesn't seem like all like impressive at the start, because it doesn't have like those big shiny combat units that some of the other battle groups might.
It's like a lot
have,
of
but
little
It
abilities.
does have a lot of like danger.
Heavy
that
micro.
It gives players, because you're ambushing and you can bring like large amounts of forces from behind camouflage
Yeah.
onto the enemy's doorstep. It really makes the enemy need to play or have detector units nearby their main force, or so at least like sprinkle mines and other or things forward of the line to keep like these camouflage units back to as like an early warning. But it also does mean like certain light vehicles and like the 4x4 with its commander, or just like skyrocket and like how important they are in keeping this battle group at bay in the early game.
And I expect players to take a little bit longer to figure out the battlefield espionage versus the British one.
Yeah. I know that the first time I played against someone who knew what they were doing with battlefield espionage on the team, I was very sad. I was just like, oh, this is what this is supposed to do. And this
Yeah.
okay, I wasn't ready for it.
It's First Strike
Miguel,
that's so strong,
What are your
man.
sort of final thoughts on these two battle groups and
First Strike is
how,
insane.
how they're going to sort of impact the game?
I just want to know how much bonus
definitely
you get
think
for it.
That, well, they'll impact the game in different ways. The British one, I think players will play a lot differently with it, just from the fact that that's a supply run. And I think we'll see a lot more of trying to get deep into the enemy lines to try and destroy the truck. And also, this is our introduction to kind of the first vehicle of its kind, the Archer, in the sense that it's like this very long-range anti-tank vehicle. So that will be a very different kind of playstyle that the British are used to, that they are missing that role in their army. For the DAC one, I think they already play in an aggressive way, so it probably won't change much in that regard. But I think when you play against this battle group, you'll probably be changing the way you play. So it's more like, as the player playing against this,
It's a good point.
you'll now be using a lot more scout units.
Mhm.
So it will probably make this patch a lot more, or not even the patch, but the playing against this battle group, a lot more about how you use your scout units. And that's a lot different than currently what you see on live.
Okay.
There's definitely air support center might make a resurgence of it. At battlefield espionage becomes common, because that is free detection and recon that the American players would always have.
Yeah. I'm like I said, I'm excited to see these two new battle groups in players' hands, and excited to see how they're utilizing them in game. So I think we'll probably leave things there for now.
All right, guys. So real quick, just want to give my perspective on the British battle group, and then we'll move to the DAC one. But very interesting. I like this style of a hyper defensive option for the British. We saw something very similar to this with the Italian coastal battle group for the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht are also a very defensive style faction, kind of like the British for the Allies. At least historically in the co-franchise, we've always seen the British being very defensive. The British, in the current iteration of the game, don't have a lot of defensive tools necessarily. They have the Bishop, they have the 17-pounder, but looks like they're going a little bit more extreme towards the emplacements and the real hard defensive tools, which is interesting to see. Now, I like having a lot of defensive options in a game that rewards offense, right? I think there should be a good balance between the two for multiple reasons. But overall, I'm very, very happy to see more defensive battle groups coming into the game, because Company of Heroes 3 in particular has a lot of offensive style themed units and battle groups. So I think it's very cool. The left-hand side, as we can see, there's resource manipulation and artillery. So the supply truck run and the resource caches, both resource manipulation based. I don't know how I feel about the supply truck run. I think it's really cool thematically. I love the idea of it. I mean, the idea of having a supply truck moving to and fro on the map, just across the map, carrying these resources, very reminiscent of Age of Empires. If you guys have played that game, that franchise, the caravans moving back and forth. As they said, the longer distance that the supply truck has to travel, the more resources you can accumulate, so it scales with range. And what's really interesting about this compared to a standard like Opel Blitz truck that we've seen in the franchise is that, of course, it's moving. So there's a lot of counterplay around this. Your opponent is going to want to identify where this is, and he's going to want to destroy it, which forces sort of this counterplay, this interaction around the supply truck. So in one sense, it's a lot more vulnerable than an Opel Blitz truck. In the other sense, you could use that to your advantage, right? Because if your opponent is attacking it, trying to kill it, well, he could be wasting a lot of manpower and resources trying to do that and not succeeding. So you could use it as bait in a lot of ways, which I find very interesting. I also find it a lot harder to use in an Opel Blitz truck because, well, you have to monitor this thing and defend it and protect it, right? So very interesting concept. Overall, I love it. I'm very curious to see how competitive it is. And I do think it should reward you with more resources than an Opel Blitz truck, which is stationary. But also easier to kill in a lot of ways with like artillery and so forth because it's stuck on the resource point. But very, very cool. I don't know too much about the reinforced resource caches. I can't speak about it too much, but it looks like more resource manipulation. And then, of course, going down to the artillery tripwire flares is interesting. That one artillery shot. I find this is a really interesting way to help you win engagements and fight around resource points. So, you know, you're going to have that that beacon appear. It's going to reveal the area, and that's going to allow long-range units like the Archer or 6-pounders or 2-pounders, any type of artillery, long-range weaponry, kind of get that first shot, that first strike, along with that artillery shot that comes in. So I find that very interesting for defensive or counterplay style players. I think it's a very cool ability that actually rewards very technical and tactical players. Charge Creeping Barrage. I don't think we saw that in this video, but it looks like some form of off-map artillery, I would think. And then the Archer Tank Destroyer, very, very strong in Co-3 in particular, because there is not a lot of Tank Hunter type long-range units in the game. Units like this are really going to have a big power spike if they're utilized properly, I feel. So it's, once again, playing into that defensive style for the British. So like archers, bishops, you know, the defensive tactics here we could see with these emplacements really is going to play into that. So I could see Bofors in combination with archer tanks for that mobility. And yeah, it just looks really, really good. Now, on the right-hand side here, we have the Australian Light Infantry section. They said that this unit does not have grenades. They said that this is a unit you can call in like the Italian Coastal Battle Group. So looks like it's a unit with not necessarily the best combat power compared to the infantry section, but has a lot of utility. So early on, it looks like... So what's really interesting about this for the British is the British are the one faction that don't have a lot of early game options, right? You could open with sappers and an MG team, or you can open with your command post, your barracks at tier 1, and then grab, you know, Dingo opening or your Tommy opening with your infantry sections. mortar, right? But there's not like a ton of options to go for different paths. Like the U.S. forces, for example, has so much early game options between the faction or the battle group. So this is really interesting in that you could technically skip your infantry sections, right? And you could replace them with your Australian light infantry and go straight into the 2-pounder, for example, which gives you that functional AT in combination with these light infantry units. And now you have this like very early tempo oriented, right? You have this like kind of like aggressive British opening, right? This opening gambit style where like you're able to field a lot of units onto the map quickly, right? But I feel like the scalability also suffers, which is good. There's a risk reward, or there's a consequence for the early game influx. So that's really interesting. If you're not going for that route, you can go for the defensive tactics, build the Bofors, build the anti-tank gun emplacements. Very interesting as well. And the Australian line infantry kind of play into that. I don't know if they can repair buildings or not. I don't think they mentioned that. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be something that only the Royal Engineers can do, or the Australian Light Infantry can also do, which would make them strong to have. But yeah, in terms of scalability, they don't have grenades. I don't feel like they have the scope lean fields, but they don't. That probably doesn't compare to the Brens, right? And I don't know. The infantry sections are obviously the way to go for scalability. So very interested to see how these guys perform. Vehicle over repair and hold the line are also interesting. I don't know how much over repair you can do, but any little bit counts. I mean, it could be the difference in the vehicle escaping, like one extra shot. So I find that to be really interesting as well, especially for units like the Archer, which are very vulnerable. And a lot of units for the British are very vulnerable in general. So very interesting battle group. Now let's go over to the DAC. All right, guys. So looking at the DAC battle group here. Now this one is very technical. It's very tactical. As Darren said, there's not a lot of like shiny new units or anything like that. I like the new icons, to be honest. I think they're pretty good, pretty well done, pretty professional. But yeah, this battle group, it looks very technical. Now, what I love about it is the fact that, as Miguel said, the DAC has been a very mechanized, combined arms type of faction from its inception, right? It was designed around this idea of being a very mechanized mobile army, not necessarily needing to rely on infantry, and players were always incentivized to play around their vehicles as the DAC. Now, we're getting a battle group that is going to allow you to really lean into an infantry style of play, very tactical infantry style of play, and I think that's really cool to see. It really is a big difference to what you normally would play as DAC. So I love the fact that if you lock into this battle group, it has large implications to the way you're playing the faction itself, which is very cool to see. I have a lot of thoughts about these things, but looking between these two, the right side has a lot more options, of course. The left side is a little bit more linear, but I feel like this 250 Panzerwagen is going to be a major player in this battle group. I mean, as they said, ton of utility for it. I don't know if it costs fuel or not, but they said that you could actually upgrade your standard 250 that you can build from the home base, from the HQ, or that you use in your columns. You can upgrade that to the 253 Panzerwagen. So I don't know what the costs are going to be, but the standard 250 is only manpower. So that's something to consider. But regardless, this thing has a ton of more utility for your infantry. I mean, they said you could build Goliaths, you could lay mines. I think they said you can capture points with it. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But it also provides that camouflage that we saw. And so that seems incredibly strong. So it's not a combat unit, it's a support unit. But this thing following and mirroring your army around the map with all of that utility, I think is going to be incredibly strong. So players are going to be targeting these, trying to kill these, of course, as much as they can. Now, you're going to have to protect these, and there's going to be a counterplay around that as well. Now, moving down, the anti-tank incendiary munitions is interesting. It kind of like, it can't kill the vehicle, as they said, but it kind of like bleeds their health more. That seems cool. I like it. But I feel like this advanced ambush training is going to be the way to go because it kind of fits within the 250 Panzerwagen, within the camouflage theme, the first strike, power and ability. I feel like that's going to be stronger. And then Operation Scorpion, in my opinion, and Miguel said the same thing in the stream, this just seems insane to me. I love the theme of it. The fact that you can camouflage your units and gain that first strike bonus for engaging the enemy. So you're going to be able to maneuver around the map. I mean, imagine a large 4v4 game. Your units are camouflaged under Operation Scorpion. You're sneaking around behind enemy lines or from a better point of attack. And you're able to gain that first strike bonus. Not only that, but if you're going to trade off your vehicles for his vehicles, you're getting a return on your vehicle so you can resupply your army and re-engage onto the battlefield quicker. This is going to be a very proactive and efficient way to engage, very tactical and strategic at the same time. I just love the theme of it. Seems a little too strong, but it's hard to say. We don't know the cost, we don't know the durations and so forth. So, but I think it's cool because like Panzer IIIs, for example, are not able to stand toe-to-toe with a lot of allied tanks. They're technically weaker, and especially without their upgrades. So Operation Scorpion fits in with the mobility and the Desert Fox idea. I just think it's really cool. Love the theme of that. And moving over to these beacons, really interesting once again. The Intel Disruption Beacon is going to, as they said, providing camouflage for your units. Of course, when they start firing, they lose that camouflage, but they have that first strike bonus. So I feel like this is super strong. The subterfuge beacons is a very cool theme. I love the idea of disrupting enemy resource points. But this little indicator, as we saw, pops up over the enemy unit. So your opponent is going to know when he's around a beacon. He's going to know he's losing resources in that case. So I feel like it's not hard to find this. So I don't know how strong this is going to be, but interesting. I love the idea. Plunder, it's a new idea and mechanic. So, being able to destroy a vehicle, go over to the wreck, plunder it, grab some weapons, really, really cool. I think it's going to also cause some counterplay where players who are losing their vehicles, let's say an American player or a British player who's losing his vehicles and there's a leftover wreckage, you're going to want to destroy that wreck so your opponent can't plunder it. So I love how much proactive and reactive counterplay there is in these two new battle groups. I think it's really interesting. And it's good game design, in my opinion. Transfer depots, I don't fully remember what this is, but I think some kind of resource manipulation, like the British one. Some kind of cache or ability to swap. I don't know what this is. Disruption operation, I remember them saying that this is going to slowly shrink the range and the sight of the units. I don't know if this is a zone. So if the soldiers leave the zone, so let's say you use this on like 3 infantry sections and an AT gun. Is it a zone, or is it on the units themselves, to where the units can retreat out of the zone and they're no longer affected, or is it upon the units and now for a set time they're just totally hindered? I don't know if that makes sense, but if it's more of a disruption zone, then it's cool because it creates that counterplay. You're basically forcing your opponent to evacuate from that area, and now you can occupy that area. I think it's really interesting. And then Firestorm, something that the DAC doesn't really have is a lot of off-map abilities. So something like this to help, once again, clear areas, especially with the British also having all these new emplacements and defensive options. Something like Firestorm, I think, is good to help kind of counterplay that. So really interesting, guys. I would love to hear your opinions on these two battle groups. These are coming in less than a month, so very excited about that. And yeah, really curious. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you guys did enjoy the video, go ahead and smash the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. It goes a long way in supporting the channel. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.